1. There are many legends about my mother. Some say she betrayed her husband, a great mortal warrior, stealing his elixir of immortality to become a goddess. Others depict her as an innocent victim who swallowed the elixir while trying to save it from thieves. Whichever story you believe, my mother, Chang'e, became immortal, as did I. I remember the stillness of my home. It was just myself, a loyal attendant named Ping'e, and my mother residing on the moon. We lived in a palace built from shining white stone, with columns of mother-of-pearl and a sweeping roof of pure silver. Its vast rooms were filled with cinnamon wood furniture, their spicy fragrance wafting through the air. A forest of white osmanthus trees surrounded us, with a single laurel in its midst, bearing luminous seeds with an ethereal shimmer. No wind nor bird, not even my hands could pluck them. They cleaved to the branches as steadfastly as the stars to the sky. My mother was gentle and loving, but a little distant, as though she bore some great pain which had numbed her heart. Each night, after lighting the lanterns to illuminate the moon, she stood on our balcony to stare at the mortal world below. Sometimes I woke just before the dawn and found her still standing there, her eyes shrouded in memory. Unable to bear the sadness in her face, I wrapped my arms around her, my head just coming up to her waist. She flinched at my touch as though roused from a dream, before stroking my hair and bringing me back to my room. Her silence pricked me. I worried that I had upset her, even though she rarely lost her temper. It was Ping'e who finally explained that my mother did not like to be disturbed during those times. "Why?" I asked. "Your mother suffered a great loss." She raised a hand to stall my next question. "It's not my place to say more." The thought of her sorrow pierced me. "It's been years. Will mother ever recover?" Ping'e was silent for a moment. "Some scars are carved into our bones, a part of who we are, shaping what we become." Seeing my crestfallen expression, she cradled me in her soft arms. "But she is stronger than you think, little star, just as you are." Despite these fleeting shadows, I was happy here, if not for the gnawing ache that something was missing from our lives. Was I lonely? Perhaps, although I had little time to fret over my solitude. Every morning my mother gave me lessons on writing and reading. I would grind the ink against the stone until a glossy black paste formed, as she taught me to form each character with fluid strokes of her brush. While I cherished these times with my mother, it was the classes with Ping'e that I enjoyed the most. My painting was passable and my embroidery dismal, but it did not matter when it was music I fell in love with. Something about the way the melodies formed stirred emotions in me which I did not yet comprehend, whether from the strings plucked by my fingers or the notes shaped by my lips. Without companions to vie for my time, I soon mastered the flute and chin, the 7-stringed zither, surpassing Ping'e's skills in just a few years. On my 15th birthday, my mother gifted me a small white jade flute that I carried everywhere in a silk pouch that hung from my waist. It was my favorite instrument, its tone so pure, even the birds would fly up to the moon to listen, though part of me believed they came to gaze at my mother too. Sometimes I caught myself staring at her, entranced by the perfection of her features. Her face was shaped like a melon seed, and her skin glowed with the luster of a pearl. Delicate brows arched over slender, jet-black eyes, which curved into crescents when she smiled. Gold pins gleamed from the dark coils of her hair, and a red peony was tucked in one side. Her inner garment was the blue of the noon sky, paired with a white and silver robe that flowed to her ankles. Wrapped around her waist was a vermilion sash, ornamented with tassels of silk and jade. Some nights, as I lay in bed, I would listen out for their gentle clink, and sleep came easy when I knew she was near. Pinga assured me that I resembled my mother, but it was like comparing a plum blossom to the lotus. My skin was darker, my eyes rounder, and my jaw more angular with a cleft in the center. Perhaps I resembled my father? I did not know. I had never met him. It was years before I realized that my mother, who dried my tears when I fell and straightened my brush when I wrote, was the moon goddess. The mortals worshipped her, making offerings to her each mid-autumn festival, on the 15th day of the 8th lunar month, when the moon was at its brightest. On this day, they would burn incense sticks for prayer and prepare mooncakes, their tender crusts wrapped around a rich filling of sweet lotus seed paste and salted duck eggs. Children would carry glowing lanterns shaped as rabbits, birds, or fish, symbolizing the light of the moon. On this one day a year, I would stand upon the balcony, staring at the world below, inhaling the fragrant incense which wafted up to the sky in honor of my mother. The mortals intrigued me because my mother gazed at their world with such yearning. Their stories fascinated me with their struggles for love, power, survival, although I had little comprehension of such intrigues in my sheltered confines. I read everything I could lay my hands on, but my favorites were the tales of valiant warriors battling fearsome enemies to protect their loved ones. One day, while I was rummaging through a pile of scrolls in our library, something bright caught my eye. I pulled it out, my pulse leaping to find a book I had not read before. From its rough, stitched bindings, it appeared to be a mortal text. Its cover was so faded I could barely make out the painting of an archer aiming a silver bow at 10 suns in the sky. I traced the faint details of a feather within the orbs. No, not suns, but birds, curled into balls of flame. I brought the book to my room, my fingers tingling as they clutched the brittle paper to my chest. Sinking down on a chair, I eagerly turned the pages, devouring the words. It began as many tales of heroism did, with the mortal world engulfed by a terrible misfortune. 10 sunbirds rose in the sky, scorching the earth and causing great suffering. No crops could grow on the charred soil, and there was no water to drink from the parched rivers. It was rumored that the gods of heaven favored the sunbirds, and no one dared to challenge such mighty creatures. Just when all hope seemed lost, a fearless warrior named Ho Yi took up his enchanted bow of ice. He shot his arrows into the sky, slaying 9 of the sunbirds and leaving 1 to light the earth. The book was snatched from me. My mother stood there, flushed, her breaths coming short and fast. As she gripped my arm, her nails dug into my flesh. "Did you read this?" she cried. My mother rarely raised her voice. I stared blankly at her, finally managing a nod. She released me, dropping onto a chair as she pressed her fingers to her temple. I reached out to touch her, afraid she would pull away in anger, but she clasped her hands around mine, her skin as cold as ice. "Did I do something wrong? Why can't I read this?" I asked haltingly. There appeared nothing out of the ordinary in the story. She was quiet for so long, I thought she had not heard my question. When she turned to me at last, her eyes were luminous, brighter than the stars. "You did nothing wrong. The archer, Ho Yi, he is your father." Light flashed through my mind, my ears ringing with her words. When I was younger, I had often asked her about my father, yet each time she had fallen silent, her face clouding over until finally my questions ceased. My mother bore many secrets in her heart which she did not share with me. Until now. "My father?" My chest tightened as I spoke the words. She closed the book, her gaze lingering on its cover. Afraid that she might leave, I lifted the porcelain teapot and poured her a cup. It was cold, but she sipped it without complaint. "In the mortal realm, we loved each other," she began, her voice low and soft. "He loved you too. even before you were born. And now, her words trailed off as she blinked furiously. I held her hand to comfort her, and as a gentle reminder that I was still here. And now, we are parted for eternity. I could barely think through the thoughts cramming my head, the emotions surging within me. For as long as I could remember, my father had been no more than a shadowy presence in my mind. How often had I dreamed of him sitting across from me as we ate our meals, strolling beside me beneath the flowering trees. Each time I awoke, the warmth in my chest dissolved to a hollow ache. Today I finally knew my father's name, and that he had loved me. It was little wonder that my mother appeared haunted all this time, trapped in her memories. What had happened to my father? Was he still in the mortal realm? How did we end up here? Yet I gulped back my questions as my mother wiped her tears away. Oh, how I wanted to know, but I would not hurt her to ease my selfish curiosity. Time, to an immortal, was as rain to the boundless ocean. Ours was a peaceful life, a pleasant one, and the years passed by as though they were weeks. Who knows how many decades would have swept by in this manner if my life had not been tossed into turmoil, as a leaf torn from its branch by the wind. It was a clear day, the sunlight streaming through my window. I set aside my lacquered chin, closing my eyes to rest. As had happened before, silver flecks of light drifted into my mind, tugging and teasing at me, just as how the scent of osmanthus drew me to the forest each morning. I wanted to reach out to them, but recalled my mother's stern warning. "Don't go near them, Xingyin," she had pleaded, her skin ashen. "It's too dangerous. Trust me, they will fade." I had stammered my promise to her then, and over the years I had kept my word diligently too. Whenever a glint of silver beckoned to me, I thought furiously of other things, a song or my latest book, until my mind cleared and they faded away. Yet it was harder each time, the lights blazing brighter, their call more tantalizing, the urge to reach out almost overwhelming. How brightly they glittered today, as though sensing my wavering resolve, the restless churning in my blood. I had felt this more often of late, a part of me yearning for something which had no name. A change, perhaps. But nothing ever happened here. Nothing ever changed. The lights did not seem dangerous. Was my mother mistaken? She had cautioned me against countless things, as harmless as climbing a tree or running through the halls, maybe recalling such perils from her mortal childhood. I drew closer to the radiance in my mind, closer than I had ever been before. Something clutched at me, dragging me away. Was it fear or guilt? But, reckless now, I tore through it as though it were cobwebs. I was at the brink, teetering on the edge. A current raced through my veins, whispers coiling between my ears. Leaning forward, I reached out, only to see the shimmering silver scatter as the starlight at dawn. My eyes flew open, my senses tingling. I had no idea how long I sat there, lost in a daze. Beyond my window, the evening sun infused the sky with threads of rose and gold. The thrill gone, remorse sat like a stone in my chest. I had broken my promise to my mother, and worse yet, I wanted to do it again. Those lights were not dangerous. They were a part of me. I knew that now with startling certainty. Why had she warned me from them? I will ask her, I decided, rising to my feet. I am old enough to know. Just as I reached the entrance, a strange energy thrummed through the air, raising the hair on the back of my neck. Immortal auras, unfamiliar to me, shifting and mingling as the clouds in the sky. I could not tell how many, although one seemed to blaze brighter than the rest, far stronger than my mother's or Pinga's. Who had come here? As I flung the doors open, my mother flew into my room. I stumbled back, knocking into a chair. Did she discover what I had done? Was she here to scold me? I hung my head. "I'm sorry, Mother. The lights—" She grasped my shoulders.
"Never mind that, Xingyin. A visitor has arrived. She mustn't know that you're here. That you're my daughter."
My pulse raced at the thought of meeting someone new. Then her meaning sank in, as did her tone, and my excitement crumpled like a sheet of paper. "You don't want me to meet your friend?" Her hands fell away from me, the planes of her face hardening until they seemed carved from marble.
"Not a friend. She is the Empress of the Celestial Kingdom. She doesn't know about you. Nobody does. And we can't let them find you."
Her words, tumbling out in a rush, startled me, despite the excitement which sparked within. I had read the Celestial Kingdom was the mightiest of the 8 immortal lands, nestled like a precious teardrop at the heart of the realm. Its emperor and empress lived in a palace that floated upon a bank of clouds, from where they governed over the celestials and mortals, and watched over the sun, moon, and stars. In all our time here, they had never deigned to visit our remote home. So why now? And why did I have to hide? A strange flutter in the pit of my stomach spread icy tendrils through my core. "Is something wrong?" I asked, hoping she would deny it. She touched my cheek gently.
"I'll explain everything later. For now, stay in your room and don't make a sound."
I nodded, and she left, shutting the doors behind her. Only then did I realize that my mother had not answered my question. I opened a book, dropping it down again after reading the same line thrice. My fingers plucked a chin string, but then pinched it to muffle the note. As I stared at the closed doors, a burning curiosity engulfed me, consuming my fear. Slowly, I walked toward it, sliding it open a crack. Just one look at the Celestial Empress, and I would return to my room. When would I get another chance to see her? One of the most powerful immortals in the realm. And she might even be wearing her phoenix crown, said to be crafted from feathers of pure gold and embellished with 100 luminous pearls. As silent as a shadow, I tiptoed down the long corridor that led from my room to the Silver Harmony Hall, the grandest room in our pure light palace, with its marble floor, jade lamps, and silk hangings. Wooden pillars set into ornate silver bases added a touch of warmth to its pristine elegance. This was where I had always imagined we would entertain our guests, although we never had one until now. Just around the corner, a soft voice drifted through. I strained my ears to listen. "Chang'e, have you been well?" The Celestial Empress's cordial address surprised me. She did not sound so very fearsome.
"Yes, your Celestial Majesty. Thank you for your concern."
My mother's voice was unnaturally bright. A brief silence followed this exchange of courtesies. Crouching down by the wall, I craned my neck to peek into the room. My mother knelt on the floor, her head bowed low, while across from her, seated in my mother's own chair, had to be the Celestial Empress. She was not wearing a crown, but an elaborate headdress crafted with jeweled leaves and flowers which clinked as she moved. As I stared at it, enthralled, a bud unfurled, blossoming into an amethyst orchid. Over her fingertips glinted pointed gold sheaths, curved as the claws of a hawk. The silver embroidery on her violet robe caught the fading light streaming through the windows. Unlike my mother's delicate and calm aura, hers was strong, pulsing with heat. She was dazzling, but her glossy lips against her white skin made me think of freshly spilled blood on snow. As befitting her exalted position, the Empress had not come alone. 6 attendants stood behind her, along with a tall, immortal man, his complexion darker than the rest. Flat pieces of amber adorned his black hat, his inky robes were fastened with a bronze sash, and white gloves covered his hands. I knew nothing of the celestial court, but the way he carried himself seemed to indicate he was of a higher rank than the others. Yet there was something about him I did not like, and as his pale brown eyes sliced across the room, I recoiled, pressing my back against the wall. After a brief pause, the Empress spoke again, her voice now cooler than a piece of unworn jade. Chang'e, a peculiar shift was detected in the energy here. Are you cultivating a secret power or harboring a forbidden guest, violating the terms of your imprisonment? I stiffened, my shoulder blades clenching at the way she spoke. An eagerness seemed to coat each word, as though she reveled in the idea of my mother's wrongdoing. Empress or not, how dare she speak this way? My mother was the moon goddess, worshipped and loved by countless mortals. How could she be a prisoner? This place was more than our home. It was her domain. Who lit the lanterns each night? Who did the trees sway and sigh for as she walked past? How could she do anything here that wasn't her right?
Your Celestial Majesty, there must be some misunderstanding. My powers are weak, as you are aware, and no one else is here. Who would dare come? My mother replied steadily.
Minister Wu, share your discovery, the Empress commanded.
Footsteps shuffled forward. Earlier today, a significant shift in the aura of the moon was detected. Unprecedented in all my years of study. This can be no coincidence.
In his smooth voice, I sensed an undercurrent of excitement. Did he relish my mother's troubles as the Empress seemed to? Anger seared me at the thought, despite my prickling unease. That rush in my veins earlier when I had touched the lights, the whispering in the air, had that somehow drawn them here? I hope our leniency has not made you bold, the Empress hissed. You were fortunate before to have been imprisoned here in comfort for stealing your husband's elixir of immortality. You escaped the lightning whip and the flaming rod then. But that will change if we discover you're engaging in further deceit. Confess now, and we might be merciful, she lashed out, shattering the tranquility of our home. My fist flew to my mouth, smothering my gasp. I had never asked my mother how she ascended to immortality, sensing it caused her pain. Yet ever since I read the tale of the sunbirds, one question kept winding through my mind. Where was my father? To hear he had been bestowed the elixir, and my mother was accused of stealing it, something twisted in my gut. The Empress was wrong, I told myself fiercely, burying a treacherous kernel of doubt. My mother neither flinched nor denied these vile accusations. Was she accustomed to such treatment from the Empress? As I peeked into the room again, she folded over to press her forehead and palms to the floor. Your Celestial Majesty, Minister Wu. Perhaps this phenomenon was caused by the recent alignment of the stars. The Azure Dragon's constellation has entered the path of the moon, which may have distorted our auras. When it passes, things should return to normal. She spoke like a scholar who studied the skies, though I knew she had no interest in such matters. A long silence followed, punctured by a rhythmic tapping, the Empress's pointed gold sheaths digging into the soft wood of the armrest. Finally, she rose, her attendants gathering behind her. That may be so, but we will come again. You have been left alone for far too long. I was glad for them to leave, despite the threat that lurked beneath the Empress's tone like a silk cord yanked tight. Unable to bear listening to more, I crept back to my room and lay on the bed, gazing out through the window. The sky had darkened into the elusive violet gray of dusk when the last of day gives way to night. My mind was numb, though I still sensed when those unfamiliar auras faded away. Moments later, my mother pulled the doors apart, her face whiter than the stone walls. My doubts vanished. I did not believe the Celestial Empress. My mother would never have betrayed my father, not even for immortality. I scrambled up from the bed, coming to her side. I was almost as tall as her now. Mother, I heard what the Empress said to you. She threw her arms around me, clutching me tight. Against her shoulder, I sagged with relief that she was not angry, though her body was tense with strain.
"We don't have much time. The Empress could return at any moment with her soldiers," she whispered.
"What can they do? We did nothing wrong." My stomach roiled, an unpleasant sensation. "Are we prisoners? What did the Empress mean about the elixir?" She leaned back to look into my face.
"Xingyan, you're not a prisoner here, but I am. The Celestial Emperor bestowed the elixir of immortality upon your father for killing the sunbirds and saving the world. Hou Yi did not take it, though. There was just enough for one, and he did not want to ascend to the skies without me. I was with child. Our happiness seemed complete, and so he hid the elixir. Only I knew where."
Her voice broke then.
"But my body was too weak to bear you. The physicians told us that we would not survive the birth. Hou Yi did not want to believe them. He did not want to give up, bringing me to one after the other, searching for a different prognosis. Yet deep down I knew they spoke the truth."
She paused, a tautness around her eyes like she was reaching into her memories, those which hurt.
"When he was called to battle, I was left alone. The pains began then, far too early in the deep of night. Such agony tore through my body I could barely cry out. I was so afraid of dying, of losing you."
As she fell silent, the question burst from me. "What happened?"
I took the elixir from its hiding place, uncorked its stopper, and drank it.
In the stillness of the room, all I could hear was the beating of my own heart. My hands were no longer warming my mother's, but were as cold as hers.
"Do you hate me, Xingyan?" she asked in a shaking voice. "For betraying your father?"
The Empress's words were true. For a moment, I could not move, my insides curling at the revelation. If my mother had not taken the elixir, perhaps we might have survived. My family, unbroken. Yet I knew how much she loved my father, how greatly she mourned his loss. And no matter what, I was grateful to be alive. I swallowed the last of my hesitation. "No, Mother. You saved us." Her gaze was distant, veiled in memory.
"Leaving your father? Oh, how it hurt. Though I must admit I did not want to die, nor could I let you die. Only later did I learn that gifts from the Celestial Emperor came with unseen strings, that such decisions were not for mortals to make. The Emperor was enraged that it was I who became immortal instead of your illustrious father. The Empress accused me of using trickery to obtain immortality which I had not earned."
"Did you explain?" I asked. "Surely if they knew it was to save us—"
"I dared not. The Empress seemed hostile, as though she bore some grudge against your father. She even accused him of ingratitude for spurning the Emperor's gift. I knew then she had sought to punish rather than reward him for killing the sunbirds. She would not hesitate to harm you. How could I tell them of your existence? To shield you from their wrath, I kept your birth a secret. I confessed my theft. As punishment, I was exiled to the moon, an enchantment cast upon me which binds me here for eternity. I cannot leave this place, no matter how much I want to." In a low voice, she added, "A palace you cannot escape is a prison nonetheless."
I struggled to breathe, my chest heaving like a fish flipped out of the water. I had thought our lives so peaceful, so safe from all the dangers in my books. To learn we had incurred the wrath of the most powerful immortals in the realm shook me to my core. "But why did the Empress come today, after all this time?"
"Our auras emanate from our life force, the core of our magic. Those lights you see in your mind. Since you were born, we did our best to conceal your power. Despite our efforts, the Empress sensed you today." My throat closed tight. "I didn't know.
This is all my fault. How stupid and reckless I had been. Because I was bored, I had ignored my mother's warning, broken my promise, and hurled us into the gravest of danger. I am to blame, too. I told you not to reach for your magic, but I should have explained why, that it might alert the celestial kingdom to your presence, she sighed. It would have happened eventually. With every year you grow stronger. If they find you, our punishment will be severe, I have no doubt. I fear less for myself, but what they would do to you, an immortal child who was never meant to be. What can we do? The only thing we can. You must leave this place. Fear glazed my skin like ice forming over a lake. To never see my mother again, I was suddenly afraid to let go of her. Can't I stay with you? I'll hide. Train me so I can help. We can't. You heard the Empress's words. They will be watching us even more closely now. It's too late. Maybe you convinced them. Maybe they won't come back. A desperate plea. A childish hope. I may have bought us a little time, but the Empress would not have come on a whim. They will return, and soon. Her voice thickened, clogged by emotion. We can't protect you. We're not strong enough. But where will I go? When will I see you again? Each word was a blow, giving shape to the forming nightmare. Ping-O will bring you to her family in the Southern Sea. She spoke brightly now, as though trying to convince us both. I hear the ocean is beautiful. You will have a good life there, free from the cloud that hangs over us. Ping-A had shared with me all she knew of the lands beyond, stirring my imagination, which hungered for adventure. The Great Sea was divided into 4 domains, stretching from the eastern shore to the southern ocean, from the cliffs in the west to the waters in the north. I had been transfixed by her tales of the creatures who lived in the glittering cities underwater or upon the golden shores. How I had dreamed of exploring them, yet never had I imagined fleeing my home to do so. What use were adventures when there was no one to share them with? My mother's hand closed around mine, dragging me back to the present. You must never tell anyone who you are. The Celestial Emperor has informants everywhere. He would take your very existence as an unforgivable insult. She spoke urgently, her eyes boring into mine until I choked out my promise to her. Leaning toward me then, she fastened something around my neck. A gold necklace with a small jade disc. It was the color of spring leaves, with a carving of a dragon on its surface. My fingers rubbed the cool stone, feeling a thin crack in the rim. This belonged to your father. Her eyes were as dark as a moonless night. Don't tell anyone who you are, but never forget either. She held me close, stroking my hair. I kept my head down, cowardly, not wanting to see her leave, wishing this moment could last forever. Her knuckles brushed my cheek once, and then there was nothing except an aching emptiness. Sinking onto the floor, I wrapped my arms around my knees. Oh, how I wanted to scream and howl and beat my fists against the ground. My hand flew to my mouth, muffling my hoarse sobs, but my silent tears, I let them stream down my face. In the single night it took the moonflower to bloom and wither, my life had been upended. My path, which had seemed a straight road, had taken a turn into the wilderness, and I was lost. The room was dark, night had fallen. The moon was still cloaked in shadows as the lanterns had yet to be lit. Moonrise would be late in coming tonight. Urgency jolted me into action. I did not wish to be discovered if Mother and Ping-O would be punished. While death was rarely inflicted upon immortals, the Empress's threats of lightning and fire made my body clench in terror. Ping-O helped me wrap my belongings into a wide piece of cloth. Not too many, and nothing too fine to avoid arousing suspicion. Her eyes were rimmed red, but seeing my stricken expression, she added, You'll be safe in the Southern Sea, as well hidden as one star in the heavens. My family will look after you and teach you all you need to know. She knotted the ends of the cloth together, forming a bag that she slung over my shoulder. Shall we go? I did not want to. Yet, numb to everything, I nodded. What else could I do? I could not even blame the vagaries of fate when it was I who had brought this upon us. As Ping-a and I hurried through the entrance, heading east into the osmanthus forest, I glanced back one last time. Never had my home seemed more beautiful than in this moment, when I was pressing each curve, each stone into my mind. The 1,000 lanterns illuminated the soil, the silver roof tiles reflected the stars, and on the balcony, where I had stared at the world below, there stood a slender figure in white. My mother's gaze was not fixed on the mortal realm, but on me, her fingers lifted in farewell. Ignoring Ping-a's urgent tug on my sleeve, I sank to my knees, folding myself over to press my forehead to the soft earth. My lips moved in a silent vow that I would return, that I would set my mother free. I did not know how, but I would try with everything that was in me. This would not be our end. As I followed Ping-a toward the cloud which would carry us away, pain struck my heart so sharp and clear, it fractured, only kept whole by a slender thread of hope. 2. I inhaled the bracing air, so fresh yet hollow without a trace of spice. As the cloud darted through the sky, I stumbled, grabbing Ping-a's arm. How eerie the night was without the lantern's glow. Only this morning, fear had been a foreign emotion to me, and now I was choked with it. Fortunately, the cloud's dewy folds did not give way beneath my feet, but was as firm as the ground, if not for the surging wind all around. It would be a long journey to the southern sea, beyond the celestial kingdom, past the lush forests of the Phoenix kingdom, farther than the golden desert even, the vast crescent of barren sand that bordered the feared demon realm. How would I ever find my way home? It struck me then, perhaps they did not think I ever would. A sea of lights glimmered in the distance, drawing me from my bleak thoughts. "The celestial kingdom," Ping-a whispered. As a sudden gust sprang up, she glanced over her shoulder, the color draining from her face. I whirled, my gaze probing the night. A large cloud soared toward us, the shadowy forms of 6 immortals upon it. Their armor gleamed white and gold, although their features were obscured by the dark. "Soldiers," Ping-a gasped. My heart hammered. "Are they searching for us?" She pulled me behind her. "They wear celestial armor. They must be here at the Empress's command. Stay down, hide. I'll try to outrun them." I pressed myself down as flat as I could, burying myself in the cool tendrils of the cloud. Part of me was glad to not see the soldiers, and yet my skin crawled with dread of the unknown. Ping-a's eyes were closed as a thin stream of light shot from her palm. Until tonight, I had never seen her use magic. Perhaps there had been no need for it before. Our cloud dashed onward, but all too soon slowed again. Sweat beaded her skin. "I can't make it go faster. I'm not strong enough. If they catch us, they'll discover who we are. Are they near?" I twisted to peer behind, wishing I had not. Steel glinted from the soldiers' hands, drawing ever closer. Soon they would overtake us. Someone might recognize Ping-a. Questions would be asked. I was a clumsy liar without the practice which welled from need. One stern look from my mother was enough to spill the truth from my tongue. Monstrous visions crowded my mind, of soldiers storming through my home, dragging my mother away in chains. A crackling whip of lightning lashed across her back, splitting her skin as blood spattered the white silk of her robe. I gagged, hot bile rising in my throat. My nails dug into the flesh of my palm. I could not let them catch us. I could not let my mother and Ping-a be hurt. But, weak as I was, there was only one thing I could think of, which might very well be the last thing I ever did. Gritting my teeth until they ached, I forced the words out. "Ping-a, set me down here." She stared at me as though I had lost my mind. "No, this is the celestial kingdom. We must reach the southern sea. We must—" My calm shattered. I tugged her arm with a frantic strength, pulling her down. "We can't outrun them. Once they capture us, they'll punish us all. I think we should split up." You must stay on the cloud. I can't control it. Pinga, at least this way we have a chance. What choice did we have? None which might give us both a hope of escaping. Yet, try as I might, I could not stop myself from trembling. She shook her head, but I pressed on. I'll be safe in the celestial kingdom, as long as they don't realize who I am. I promised Mother I wouldn't tell anyone, and I won't. I'll find some place to hide. Maybe you can outrun the soldiers without me? My words fell out in a rush. In a moment, it would be too late. The decision wrenched from us. Fire blazed through the night, streaking toward us. It struck, our cloud shuddering as it swerved sharply. Heat flashed over my skin as Pinga raised her hand, gleaming with light which extinguished the flames. With a cry, she fell beside me. They're attacking, she said in disbelief, even as she pressed her glowing palms into the cloud, speeding it along. Terror gripped me, but I could not succumb. Not now, when every second mattered. Pinga, it's the only way. We can't let them catch us. I spoke firmly, urgently, no longer a child pleading to be heard. This is my choice, too. Something hardened over her face then, a grim determination. She pointed to a thick cloud bank in the distance. Over there, I'll drop down as low as I can. I'll shield you from the fall. Despite her reassuring words, something unsettled me. Her breathing came harsh and labored. Her skin was damp to my touch. Was she sick? Impossible. Immortals did not suffer such ailments. Pinga, are you hurt? Did the fire? Just a little tired, nothing to worry yourself over. I rolled on my side, peering over the edge as the cloud hurtled on. My mind leapt to the perils ahead, beyond the emptiness beneath to those glittering lights weaving across the darkness. Beautiful, terrifying. Scrambling up, I threw my arms around Pinga, hugging her tight. Wishing I did not have to let go. Wishing for so many things, none of which would ever come to pass. She clutched me with a raw desperation as we dove into the cloud bank. Droplets of icy water brushed my skin, the moisture clinging to my clothes. As we plunged lower, the chill bit deep, right into my bones. My legs quivered as I uncoiled them to stand. Pinga's skin was like ash gone cold as she wrapped an arm across my shoulder. The air shimmered as a feathery tingle glided over me. The shield will cushion your fall, but you might still feel pain, and you must be careful at all times. Her hands shook as she slung my small bag over my arm. Will you try to return? Once the danger passes? I clung to this frail hope, trying to gather the scraps of my courage, trying not to fall apart. Tears pooled in her eyes. Of course, but if I don't, I'll find my way back. One day, I said quickly to assure us both. You will. You must. For your mother. She drew a sharp breath. Are you ready? I was wound so tight I thought I might snap. No, I would never be ready to leap into this unknown, to sever this final cord to my home. But if I didn't leave now, if I yielded to my clawing panic, if I let myself sink into the shadow of doubt, what little resolve remained would vanish. Facing her, I forced my stiff legs to take a step back to the edge. I would rather see her 100 times over than the gaping hollow below. Now, she cried out in a sudden burst of strength, her eyes blazing. My legs staggered back, just as Pinga's head rolled to the side and she collapsed into a crumpled heap upon the cloud. But I was falling too, through the black void of the sky. The wind struck all thought from me, swallowing the cry that erupted from my throat, whipping my face and limbs until they were raw. My clothes sucked forward in a cloud of silk. I could not breathe through the air slamming against me, my lungs afire. A roaring in my ears blocked out everything except my pounding heart. Yet ahead of me, shrinking to a speck, was Pinga's cloud, gone still. Her body was huddled where she had fallen. Had she fainted? Move! I screamed in a soundless cry as the soldiers raced toward her. Terror shriveled my insides as I stretched out my hands, a futile gesture, grasping wildly at something within me. My skin tingled, hot, then cold, as a glittering surge of air hurtled across the emptiness toward Pinga's cloud. It shimmered brightly before bolting away, vanishing into the distant horizon.
I crashed into the ground, pain erupting across my body. The air knocked from my chest. I could only lie there as tears flowed from my eyes, mingling with the sweat that slicked my skin. A weariness gripped me. As my fingers grasped soft grass beneath me, I drew a trembling breath, the scent of flowers filling my nostrils. Sweet, yet I was numb to it. Pressing my palms to the ground, I pushed myself up, sore and aching, but otherwise unharmed. Pinga's enchantment had shielded me from the worst of the fall. I thought I was saving her, but she had helped me get away, careless of her own safety. Had she escaped? Was my mother safe? Was I? My breaths came short and fast. I was drowning, struggling for air. Immortals did not suffer from illnesses or old age, but we could still be hurt by the weapons, creatures, and magic of our realm. Fool that I was, I never imagined such dangers would touch us. And now, I curled into a tight ball, arms wrapped around my knees, a thin, keening wail slipping from me like that of a wounded animal. Stupid, I cursed myself again and again for bringing this upon us, until at last I clamped my lips shut to muffle the sounds. I did not know how long I lay there, my throat racked raw with swallowed grief. And yes, I feared for myself too, as thoughts of cruel soldiers and vicious beasts crowded my mind. Who knew what lurked in the dark? I was unraveling, a tangled wreck. But then, a beam of light fell across me. Lifting my head, I stared at the moon, the first time I had seen it from afar. Beautiful and luminous, and comforting too. I breathed easier, finding solace in the thought that as long as the moon rose each night, I would know my mother had lit the lanterns and was well. A memory crept into my mind of her walking through the forest, her white robe gleaming in the dark. My bruised heart cramped with longing, but I steeled myself against sinking into the abyss of self-pity again. Bright flickers from below caught my eye, shimmering lights dancing within their inky depths. Were these the ones I had glimpsed from above? Only then did I realize the ground was like a mirror, a reflection of the stars weaving across the night. Their unfamiliar beauty seared me, a stark reminder that I was no longer home. I slumped back down, clasping my arms across my body, staring at the moon until my pain subsided, and I finally fell into a dreamless sleep on the cold, hard ground. Someone was patting my arm. Was it my mother? Had all this been a terrible dream? Hope flared, shattering the haze of slumber. My eyes opened, blinking in the brightness of day. The swirling lights had vanished, and reflected in their place were the rosy clouds of dawn. A woman crouched beside me, a basket by her side. Her hand, which rested on my elbow, was as warm and dry as the surface of a paper lantern. "Why are you sleeping here?" she frowned. "Are you all right?" I lurched up, suppressing a gasp from the ache in my back. I could barely manage a nod to her question, numb from the memories which crashed over me. "Be careful here. You should go home. I heard there was some disturbance last night, and soldiers are patrolling the area." She picked up her basket, rising to her feet. My insides nodded. Disturbance? Soldiers? "Wait!" I cried, unsure of what to say, yet not wanting to be left alone. "What happened?" "Some creature broke through the wards. The guards gave chase." She shuddered. "We've had fox spirits in recent years, though I heard this might have been a demon, trying to snatch celestial children for their evil arts." One of those monsters? From the demon realm? It hit me then that it was I the guards were searching for. That I was the supposed demon. I would have laughed aloud had I not been stricken with fear. Pinga must not have been aware of the wards. "Did they catch anyone?" My voice came out feeble and thin. "Not yet, but don't worry. Our soldiers are the finest in the realm. They'll capture the intruder in no time." She gave me a reassuring smile before asking, "What are you doing here at this hour?" I sagged with relief. Pinga had gotten away. Yet I must have lain here for hours, and she had not come back.
That gale which had burst through the skies, sending her soaring away? Did it take her too far? A thought nudged me. Had that power somehow come from me? Could I do such a thing again? No. How ridiculous to think so. Besides, nothing good had come of my magic so far, and I could not risk drawing any attention to myself. I started, realizing the woman was staring at me, her earlier question left unanswered. She did not suspect me because she expected some fearsome beast or fiend, but I dared not give her any reason to doubt me now. I have nowhere to go. I was dismissed from the household I worked in. I fell and fainted. My words were clumsy, my tone halting, my tongue unused to uttering such brazen lies. Her face softened. Perhaps she sensed my misery, spilling from me like a river swollen with rain. By the four seas, some of these nobles are so ill-tempered and selfish. There now, it isn't so bad. You'll soon find another place. She cocked her head to one side. I work at the Golden Lotus Mansion. I hear the young mistress is looking for another attendant if you're in need of a position. Her kindness was a warmth in the winter of my misery. My mind raced. Wandering alone by myself would surely arouse suspicion. I wasn't sure how I could think of such mundane things, but something hardened inside me. Grief was a luxury I could ill afford after wallowing in it half the night. If I fell apart now, it would all have been for nothing. I would find a place here, and somehow I would make my way home, whether it took me a year, a decade, or a century. Thank you. I'm grateful for your kindness. I bent from my waist in a graceless bow, as we never stood on such ceremony at home. It seemed to please her as she smiled, motioning for me to follow her. We walked the rest of the way in silence, past a grove of bamboo trees and across a gray stone bridge that arched over a river, before arriving at the gates of a large estate. A black lacquered plaque was displayed just below the roof of the entrance, gilded with the characters, Golden Lotus Mansion. It was a sprawling estate, a cluster of interlinked halls and spacious courtyards. Red columns held up curved roofs of midnight blue tiles. Lotus flowers floated upon the ponds, their fragrance heady and sweet. I followed the woman through long corridors lit by rosewood lanterns until we reached a large building. Leaving me by the doorway, she approached a ruddy-faced man and spoke to him. He nodded once before coming toward me. I stood straighter, instinctively smoothing out the creases in my robe. "Ah, this is well-timed," he exclaimed. "Our young mistress, Lady Mei Ling, admonished me just last night for not having found her a replacement, although one wonders why she can't make do with 3 attendants," he muttered as he fixed me with an appraising stare. "Have you served in a large household before? What are your skills?" I swallowed hard, thinking of my home. I had not been idle, helping out whenever I could. "Not as large as this one," I finally ventured. "I would be grateful for any position you can offer. I can cook, clean, play music, and read." My skills were far from impressive, but my answer seemed to satisfy him. The next few days were spent learning my tasks, from how to brew Lady Mei Ling's tea to her liking, to preparing her favorite almond cakes and caring for her garments, some adorned with such exquisite embroideries they seemed to quiver beneath my touch. Other duties included polishing the furniture, washing the bedding, and tending to the gardens. I was kept on my feet from dawn till night, maybe because I had no powers to speak of that might have eased my chores. It was the rules here which chafed more than the labor, dictating the depth of my bows, requiring me to hold my tongue until spoken to never sit in my mistress's presence, to obey her every command without hesitation. Each rule ground my pride a little more into the dirt, widening the gulf between mistress and servant, a constant reminder of the inferiority of my position and the fact I was no longer home. These might have stung more, yet my heart was already leaden with grief, my mind sunken with worries far greater than aching feet or palms scraped raw. And, in a way, I was glad my days were crammed even with such drudgery, leaving me little time to dwell on my misery. When the chief steward finally deemed my performance satisfactory, I was assigned to Lady Mei Ling, along with her other attendants with whom I would be sharing a room. She was supposedly a demanding mistress, but I hoped among the four of us we might suffice. When I arrived with my bag, the other attendants were getting dressed, slipping on willow green robes over their white inner garments. One of the girls helped another tie a yellow sash around her waist. A pretty girl with dimples slid a brass lotus-shaped hairpin into her hair, which all of us were required to wear. They were a lively trio, chattering among themselves with easy familiarity. Despite the misery that weighed on me, a spark kindled in my chest. Perhaps I finally had the opportunity to make the friends I had long wished for. The girl with the dimples swung toward me. "Are you the new girl? Where are you from?" The story Pinga had helped me concoct flew out of my head. Under the weight of their stare, heat rushed into my cheeks. The others giggled, their eyes gleaming as rain-washed pebbles. "Jiayi," one of them called to the girl with the lotus pin. "She seems to have lost her voice." Jiayi's stare raked me, her mouth curling as though seeing something which displeased her. Was it my plain hairstyle, or the lack of ornaments dangling from my waist, wrists, and neck? Or was it that I lacked her poise, her assurance of her place in this world? All of which heralded the simple truth that I was an outsider, that I did not belong. "What do your parents do? My father is the chief guard here," she declared with a distinct air of superiority. "My father slew the suns. My mother lights the moon." That would wipe the smug expression from her face, yet I stifled the reckless impulse. A moment's satisfaction was not worth being branded a liar or thrown into a cell, not to mention the danger to my mother and Pinga if they believed me. "I have no family here," I said instead. A safe answer, though one which would earn me more of their contempt. I could already see it in the looks they exchanged. Now they knew I had no one to protect me. "How dull. Where did the steward find you? Off the street?" Jiayi sniffed, turning away. One by one, the rest followed suit, talking among themselves once more as gaily as a flock of birds. Ice glazed the pit of my stomach. I was not sure what they expected of me, only that, somehow, I had been found lacking, unworthy. I walked woodenly to the far corner and lifted my bag onto the empty bed. The girls laughed, sharing a joke among themselves, their merriment driving the sting of my isolation deeper. As a lump formed in my throat, I hurried outside to gather my composure. I hated running away, but I would hate more crying in front of them. "Save your tears for something which matters," I told myself fiercely before returning to the room. They swung to me at once, the sudden silence jarring. Only then did I notice my cloth bag was unknotted, its contents strewn across the floor. The air was thick with hostility as I crawled around to retrieve my possessions. Someone snickered, my ears burning at the sound. "Childish, petty," I seethed. But oh, how the humiliation seared. How privileged I had been to have only known love and affection until now. In my childhood, I had been terrified of the vicious monsters I read of in my books. Yet I was learning that as much to be feared was a scythe-like smile and words that cut deep. Never had I imagined people like this existed. Those who took pride in treading on the dignity of another, those who thrived on the misery of others. A small voice inside me whispered that I was indeed picked off the street, with no skills or connections to speak of. Perhaps, if I held my tongue and kept my head down, they might eventually accept me as one of them. I was so tired, I just wanted to let things be. What did it matter if they won? Who cared for dignity or honor? It was nothing compared to all I had lost. But something within me cried out in protest. No, they would not shame me. I would not pander or flatter to gain their friendship. I would rather be alone than have such friends as these. And though I felt lesser than an insect in this moment, I raised my chin to meet their stares. Scorn was stamped across Jiayi's pretty features. Yet there was unease, too, in the way her eyes flicked away. Did she expect me to slink aside and fade into the shadows? I was glad to have disappointed her. They had wounded me, but they would not have the satisfaction of knowing it. Their unkindness only had as much power as I gave it, and I would wrench back my tattered pride from beneath the soles of their feet because it was all I had left. 3. The pavilion overlooked a courtyard of wisteria, the trees draped with clusters of lilac blossoms. I stood behind my mistress, Lady Mei Ling, who wore a pink brocade dress with gleaming flowers on the flowing sleeves and skirt. It was exquisite, the embroidered petals blushing a deep red before turning silver once more. My eyes widened. Lady Mei Ling possessed countless outfits, but this was a rare one. Only the most skilled seamstresses could enchant their creations to respond to its wearer's powers. In addition to serving Lady Mei Ling and keeping her rooms and courtyard pristine, I was assigned the care of her garments, her robes, cloaks, and sashes of silk, satin, and brocade. At first, it seemed a pleasant, if somewhat tedious task, but I soon learned I bore the brunt of her considerable displeasure whenever anything was misplaced, for the slightest scratch or speck of dust. To make matters worse, Jia Yi selected our mistress's attire each day, adding to my workload with her never-ending stream of complaints and demands. Perhaps sensing my distraction, Lady Mei Ling's lips pursed as she glanced my way. "Tea," she said curtly. I hastened to refill her cup, the fragrant steam curling in the air. A strong gust of wind blew through the courtyard, showering petals across the grass. Lady Mei Ling smoothed down her fluttering sleeves, her brow puckering as though vexed the wind had dared to disrupt her morning. "Xingyan, fetch my cloak," she demanded. "The peach silk with the gold hem. Make sure you get the right one." I bowed, fighting the urge to grind my teeth. Lady Mei Ling was young, but she possessed the imperious temperament of a 1,000-year-old matriarch. Just a few months had passed since I came here, but the warmth of being among loved ones had already faded to the echo of a memory. As promised, I kept my identity a secret, yet it was never far from my thoughts. At night, I listened out for the deep and steady breathing of my roommates before letting my mind drift to the shining halls of my home. That's when the nightmares began. Of my mother and Pinga being captured by soldiers. Of returning home to find it deserted and left in ruins. It was no wonder I often awoke drenched in sweat, gasping through the cramp in my chest. The other attendants disliked me, thinking my situation beneath theirs. Their contempt only steeled my spine, although they made life hard for me in countless petty ways, ruining the things in my care, mocking my every word, carrying untrue tales of me to our mistress. She sent me to kneel in the courtyard so many times, I felt I was one of the carved stone lions that guarded the entrance. I should not complain. This was better than imprisonment or being flogged with flaming whips. Yet, more than the discomfort, it was the indignity which stung. Each time I sucked back my tears, swallowing them all until I could almost taste the difference between the bitter tang of humiliation and the salt of sorrow. I hurried to Lady Mei Ling's room and searched frantically for her cloak. Her patience was short, and her temper as incendiary as those firecrackers the mortals set off during festivals. Finally, I spotted it flung onto a chair. Picking it up, my relief vanished at the sight of the dark blot seeping through the fabric, the ink still glistening. Without thinking, I dropped it back down before it stained my skin. "What's the matter?" Jia Yi entered, a smile playing on her lips as she stared at the ruined garment. "If you don't look after our young mistress's clothes properly, you only have yourself to blame." As her hand flicked out in a disdainful wave, I stiffened to see one of her fingers darkly stained. "It was you," I said flatly. It should have come as no surprise. Her cheeks reddened as she tossed her head. "Who would believe you anyway?" My temper, simmering over the months of indignities, roiled over. "Such tricks don't make you better than anyone. They make you less, I hissed. Jia took a step back. Was she afraid I might attack her? All I wanted was an apology, an admission of her guilt instead of hiding behind her mocking smiles and accomplices. But I was denied even that as Lady Mei-ling stormed into the room. What's taking you so long? I'm almost frozen from the wind. As her gaze slid to the cloak on the floor, her mouth fell open. Jia recovered her composure first, her eyes wide and guileless as she picked up the garment and shook it out to better display the mark. Young mistress, Xingyin spilled ink on it. She told me not to tell you because she was afraid. I breathed deeply, fighting for calm. Lady Mei-ling would never side with me against her favorite attendant, not without proof, which I had this time. Jia is mistaken. I did no such thing. It was stained before I got here. Young mistress is welcome to inspect us for stains. Jia paled as she buried her hands into the silken folds of the cloak. She need not have bothered as Lady Mei-ling's eyes pinched tight, like a cat who had been stroked the wrong way. She disliked me, perhaps influenced by the stories the others told her. Jia is your senior in this household. Apologize to her at once, then clean this and make sure it's spotless. She snatched the offending garment and tossed it at me. It struck my cheek, slithering down to pool by my feet. I could not speak, my gut recoiling from the injustice. My arms remained wooden by my sides in defiance of her orders. A wild urge gripped me to hurl the garment back at her, to pour freshly ground ink over Jia's own robe, to storm out. But here the fantasy ended. Where could I go? As Lady Mei-ling's lips clamped into thin streaks, I dropped my head, forcing out an apology. Grabbing the cloak, I ran from the room, unsure how much longer I could contain myself. I wanted to be alone, far from the chatter of the other attendants. I was beginning to understand why my mother preferred solitude during the times that burdened her heart. With a bucket and a bar of soap, I made my way to the nearby river. Clusters of bamboo grew all around, lush emerald green as they stretched proudly toward the sky. I sat by the riverbank, scrubbing the cloak, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. How I missed my home. The vow I had made to rescue my mother crushed me with its sheer futility. How could I ever help her, powerless as I was? My future stretched before me, lonely and bleak, a lifetime of servitude without hope of betterment. An unwanted tear welled up in the corner of my eye. I had learned to swallow them, inhaling sharply or blinking them away. But as I was alone, I let it trail down my cheek. Why are you crying? A clear voice rang out, startling me. I spun around, only now noticing the young man sitting on a rock a short distance away, an elbow resting on his raised knee. How could I have missed his aura, which pulsed in the air, strong and warm, as bright as a cloudless noon? His dark eyes gleamed from beneath sweeping brows, and there was a radiance to his skin, like it had been glazed by the sun. His long black hair was gathered up into a tail, spilling over his blue brocade robe, which was fastened around his waist with a silk belt. A yellow jade ornament swung from his sash, its tassel reaching to his knees as he jumped down and strode toward me. As he returned my gaze unreservedly, heat crept up my neck. It can't be that hard to clean some dirty clothes, he remarked, staring at the bundle in my hands. How would you know? It's a lot harder than it looks, I retorted. And I would never cry over this, it's just... I miss my family. The moment the words slipped out, I bit my tongue. It was the truth, but what had possessed me to speak of such things to a stranger? If you miss your family, just go back to them. Why would you leave, especially for work such as this? He gestured at the sodden garment dismissively, the corner of his lips curving up. Was he mocking me? I'd had my fill of such treatment today. His arrogance, the careless way he spoke, snapped my frayed nerves. What did he know of my troubles? Who was he to judge? I cast a pointed look at his finery. Not everything is that simple. Not everyone is as fortunate to do as they please. And I'll take no advice from someone who has never worked a day in his life. His smile vanished.
Your attitude is rather insolent for an attendant.
He sounded more curious than offended. Being an attendant doesn't mean I don't have my pride. The work I do is not a reflection of who I am. Turning my back to him, I scrubbed at the cloak with more vigor than before. I had wasted too much time already. Lady Mayling would be furious if I took too long, which would mean another night of kneeling on the cold, hard ground. There was no reply, and I thought he had left, tired of teasing me. Yet I twisted around to find him still there.
Looking for me?
He laughed. As a heated denial rose in my throat, he added quickly,
Are you from the Golden Lotus Mansion?
How did you know? I rose to my feet, wondering if he was an acquaintance of Lady Mayling. He leaned forward then, his outstretched hand grazing the side of my head. I recoiled and swatted him away, knocking out the brass lotus pin from my hair. Before I could move, he bent down and picked it up from the grass. Without a word, he wiped the pin against his sleeve, sliding it back into my hair. Dirt smeared his robe, which seemed not to bother him in the least. Thank you, I said, finding my voice. No, he could not be my mistress's friend. None of them would ever help an attendant.
Your pin, he explained. Don't all the attendants from there wear the same one?
I nodded as I sat down, plunging the cloak into the stream again, cursing inwardly at the stubborn ink. Instead of leaving as I expected, he settled down beside me, his legs dangling over the edge of the bank.
Why are you so unhappy?
It had been so long since I had someone to talk to, someone willing to listen. My caution, so carefully cultivated here, thawed in the spark of his warmth. Each morning, when I awaken, I don't want to open my eyes, I began haltingly, unused to unburdening myself.
Maybe you should sleep more if you're so tired.
He grinned, but I scowled at him, in no mood for humor. How silly I was to think he might have cared. I grabbed the cloak and bucket to leave as he scrambled to his feet.
I'm sorry, he said stiffly,
as though unaccustomed to apologizing.
I shouldn't have made fun of you when you were trying to tell me something important.
No, you shouldn't have. Yet there was no rancor in my voice. His apology had blunted my resentment. It was heartfelt and kind, both of which I had encountered little of since leaving my home.
If you're still willing to tell me, I would be honored to listen.
He inclined his head with unexpected formality. I snorted. I would hardly describe this as an honor, but I appreciate your clumsy attempt at flattery.
Clumsy?
It was his turn to scowl.
Did it work?
He asked unrepentantly. I could not suppress my smile. Unfortunately. As an awkward silence settled over us, I plucked a long blade of grass and wound it between my fingers.
So, why do you dread each day? He probed.
I tied a knot in the grass, and then another. It was easier to look at it than at him. Because I have nothing to look forward to. I'm a failure, and no matter what I do, how hard I try, nothing will ever change. Have you ever felt this way? Helpless? At once, I chided myself for being a fool. Someone like him would never understand.
Yes,
he said simply. You do? It was not that I doubted him, but he seemed to be one of those golden creatures who possessed more than their fair share of blessings. I knew nothing of him except his appearance and fine garments, yet his assured manner heralded privilege louder than bloodlines or titles. He leaned back, resting his palms on the grass.
Everyone has their own troubles. Some lay them bare while others hide them better. For myself, I do what I can to stretch the boundaries which chafe, even if it's just a little each time. Who knows when the slightest shift might make a difference?
What he said struck a chord in me. I had berated myself for being weak, but had that been an excuse for doing nothing? These past months, I had been a shadow of myself, hollowed by grief and self-pity. It was true that I possessed no powers to speak of, no friends or family to aid me. But I was not helpless, not even when those soldiers had chased Pinga and me. I had taken a wild chance then, rather than await certain capture. So why not here, where shelter came at the price of my dignity and dreams? I might not find a means out now, but through small nudges, little steps, I might carve my way after all, one that might lead me home. A giddy relief swept over me, unexpected yet welcome. I was grateful to him, this odd-mannered man, at times offensive yet courteous and kind. Oh, my situation was still dire, but my spirit, while bruised, was unbroken. Perhaps all it had taken was finally being seen as a person again, as myself. To be reminded there was life beyond the Golden Lotus Mansion once I broke this cycle of misery, which I had somehow trapped myself into believing was my only path forward. I would leave tomorrow, but I have nowhere to go, I muttered fervently. What about your family, your friends? Can't they help? My face shuddered. My mother and Pinga were lost to me. I have no one. Have your parents passed? He asked tentatively. I shuddered at the thought, wishing I had not spoken of my mother. The mortals believed it courted bad luck to even speak such things aloud. Too many fears still shrouded my heart, of too many things which could go wrong. His expression softened. I'm sorry, he said gently, taking my silence as an answer. Guilt lay heavy on my tongue. I did not want to lie to him, yet I could not tell him the truth. But worse still was claiming his sympathy, which I had no right to. I opened my mouth to correct him, to utter the words that would dispel his compassion and leave him a disinterested stranger once more, but the sound of footsteps cut me off. It was Lady Mailing, stalking toward me in a rustle of brocade. I leapt to my feet, fighting the familiar dread spreading through me. The air shifted with the heat of her aura, anger rolling off her in waves. I was well versed in the stages of her temper, and from the scarlet modeling her cheeks, she was truly furious. Xingyan! How long does it take to clean one small stain? I winced at the sharpness in her tone, even as something hardened along my spine. No apology sprang to my tongue, nor did I drop my gaze. My silence seemed to enrage her further. How dare you sit here, idling about and chatting to strangers? She cast a scornful look at my new acquaintance. But then, a strange and wonderful thing happened. Her face drained of color. A gasp sucked from her lips. Dropping to her knees, she cupped her hands together, holding them before her as she folded over in a formal bow to the young man who had risen to stand beside me. Lady Mailing greets His Highness, Crown Prince Liwei. Her voice turned as sweet as honey. If we had known you were honoring us with your presence, we would have prepared a proper welcome. I would have followed her to sink to my knees too, but all I could manage was to stare at him in disbelief. Why didn't he tell me who he was? He had not lied either, I reminded myself. Gone was the gentle young man I had confided in. In his place was a lord, secure in his might. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression aloof. If I had seen this side of him earlier, I might have fled. He nodded to her with cool formality. Lady Mailing, what has this attendant done to earn such a harsh rebuke? A soft sigh slid from her as her shoulders drooped. How frail and lovely she appeared right now, like a rose stripped of its thorns. Your Highness, I have always treated those who serve me as though they were my own family. What you witnessed was just a slip in my temper, caused by this attendant's repeated offenses. Strangled sounds emerged from my throat, which I choked back down. Prince Liwei's expression was inscrutable. Did he believe her? And why did my spirit sink at the thought? How has she offended you? His tone was pleasant, yet he did not give Lady Mailing permission to rise. She spoiled my favorite garment and tried to lie her way out of it. I did not lie, I cried out, all decorum forgotten. Prince Liwei's back stiffened a little. Did he regret being drawn into this trivial squabble? Such were my days at the Golden Lotus Mansion, an incessant stream of pettiness which wore away and gnawed at me. But no more, I decided. My encounter with the prince, inexplicable though it was, had reminded me that I did not need to meekly walk the path set before me. I would seek and use all the advantages I could find, even that of his position now.
"Did you see her ruin your garment?" he asked Lady Mayling. She hesitated. "No, I heard from—" His hand flew up, cutting her off. "Lady Mayling, you appear quick to cast blame without proper investigation." He took the cloak from me and looked at the blot, which all my efforts so far had failed to lessen. The air warmed as golden light streaked from his palm into the silk. The stain disappeared, the cloak drying as though it had never been wet. His magic was strong, as was the ease with which it flowed from him. How I wished I could do that. The gale which had sprung up to snatch Ping-a to safety seemed a distant dream. If it had come from me, I had no idea how to do it again. When I closed my eyes, I still caught tantalizing glimpses of the lights within me, but they darted away the instant I reached out. My attempts were half-hearted at best. The sight of them stabbed me with fear and remorse. If only I had not drawn the Empress's attention, I would still be home. Maybe Ping-a would have eventually taught me how to use my powers. I thought, bitterly, what use was magic when it was untrained? And there would be little hope of advancing my skills as long as I remained here. In the Golden Lotus Mansion, only the most favored servants were taught to channel their magic to perform rudimentary tasks, to aid their chores. The guards were instructed in attack and defense enchantments, from raising shields of protection to casting bolts of fire or ice, while the rest of us were expected to labor as the mortals did. Admittedly, most of the other attendants possessed a weak life force, unlikely to ever become strong enough to ascend the hierarchy of immortals. Perhaps it was true for me as well, but deep down, I did not think so. It was my powers which had drawn the Celestial Kingdom's attention. It had been my bane, but perhaps I could turn it into an advantage, if I found someone willing to train me. Prince Liwei passed the now pristine cloak to Lady Mayling. "I trust there will be no need to berate anyone further." His tone hardened. "Any senior attendant in your household, or even you yourself, could have fixed this without resorting to such measures. Such behavior from a position of privilege does not reflect well upon you."
2 red spots burned in Lady Mayling's cheeks. A petty part of me relished watching her get reprimanded. But what would happen when the prince left? As a new voice rang out, that of Lady Mayling's father, my anxiety increased 3-fold.
"Your Highness!"
He hurried to where we stood, likely alerted to the Crown Prince's presence by a vigilant attendant. Sinking to his knees, he performed a formal obeisance, touching his brow to the ground.
"If my daughter or this servant has offended you, I plead for your forgiveness." "I was disappointed to see how Lady Mayling treats those in her household," the prince said. "Such behavior has no place in my court. When I return, I intend to rescind the invitation to your house for the selection of my companion."
I stifled a gasp. Lady Mayling had spoken of little but this ever since she was chosen as a candidate. The Crown Prince had arranged this competition to choose a study companion, one who would learn alongside him. Was this what he meant by stretching the constraints which chafed him? Was he tired of his friends in the palace? It was said the prince wished to open the opportunity to the entire kingdom, but his parents ruled otherwise. Now each candidate had to be sponsored by a noble household, who then proceeded to put forth only their kin. Lady Mayling's father blanched. It would be a terrible humiliation to be struck off the list, and there would be endless gossip as to why his daughter had been found wanting.
"Please, forgive her, Your Highness," he implored. "My daughter would be a true flower to grace your court, should she be fortunate enough to join it."
A bold idea formed in my mind. Audacious even, but I might never have such a chance again. To no longer be at the mercy of a capricious mistress, to study with Prince Liwei, to learn to harness my powers. My mouth went dry at the thought. Perhaps then I could help my mother. I sank to my knees, performing a clumsy bow. Your Highness, please don't withdraw Lady Mayling's invitation, but... The words stuck in my throat like a firmly lodged fishbone. He waited, his patience calming my scattered nerves. My tongue darted over my lips as I gathered the courage to say, I wish to participate too. Lady Mayling and her father swiveled to me, their eyes bulging. To them, I was nothing, undeserving of such an honor. I wanted to sink through the ground, unused to putting myself forward this way. But Prince Liwei's opinion was the only one that mattered. He blinked, seemingly taken aback for the first time since I met him. Why? He drew out the word. Lady Mayling's father had hoped to knit closer ties with the royal family. There was even talk of her winning the prince's affection. I cared little for all that. It crossed my mind to flatter him, but I decided to speak from the heart. It was what I had done before I knew who he was. Your Highness, it would be an honor to be in your company, but that is not why I want this. He tapped his chin, his lips twitching. You don't want to be in my company? No, Your Highness. I mean, yes, I do want to be in your company, I stammered. But more than anything, I want to learn with you, from the greatest masters of the kingdom. Silently, I cursed my fumbling words and inability to flatter. He would refuse, I thought in despair, but it would have been worse not to have tried. He stilled, as though weighing my answer. Finally, he said to Lady Mayling's father, I will allow your daughter to keep her place on one condition, that you sponsor this attendant's participation as well. Hope soared in me like a kite swept up by the wind. Your Highness, she is just an attendant, Lady Mayling's father protested. What we do is not a reflection of who we are, Prince Liwei echoed my earlier words, his steely gaze far beyond his years. Sponsor them both, or none at all. Yes, Your Highness. Lady Mayling's father bowed as Prince Liwei walked away, disappearing into the bamboo forest. A tense silence followed his departure. I picked up my things, intending to make myself scarce when Lady Mayling's father waved me over. How do you know the Crown Prince? He demanded. I only met him today, I replied honestly. He squinted at me, stroking his beard. Why is he so interested in your well-being? He wondered aloud, observing nothing in my appearance that might have prompted the Crown Prince's defense. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of Lady Mayling's face, still red from fury and humiliation. Reluctant to salt her wound, I chose my words with care. He saw me crying, and I think he felt sorry for me. It struck me then this was probably the truth. He nodded, dismissing me with a flick of his hand. Pity for someone like me was something he could comprehend. I bowed and excused myself, my steps lighter than a gliding feather. I was no deluded fool. It would take a miracle for me to win. But there was a deep satisfaction in reaching out to grasp this opportunity. Even if I lost, even if I was turned out of the Golden Lotus Mansion, this sliver of hope was a breath of fresh air in my stagnant existence. Spurred by new resolve, I walked back with my head held a little higher. I was no longer a child willing to drift with the tide. I would steer against the current if I had to. And if I won by some miraculous stroke of luck, I would never be helpless again. 4. I found no rest in sleep, my mind plagued by visions of failure. Throwing the covers off, I rose to ready myself. All the candidates had been given a set of garments and a sandalwood tablet engraved with our names. I slipped on the apricot silk robe, tying the yellow brocade sash around my waist. Then a diaphanous coat, the shifting hues of dawn. Flowing sleeves grazed my wrists, the skirt coming down to my ankles. My fingers ran over the material, light and soft, with a subtle shimmer in its threads. I had not worn such fine silk since my home. Lacking the skills to try anything more elaborate with my hair, I pulled it into a tail that swung across my back. Picking up the wooden tablet, I fastened it to my waist, tracing the characters of my name carved into it. Silver Star, the constant companion to the moon. Mother, I thought, I'll make you proud of me today. I made my way to the doors, eager to escape the stony stares from the other girls who were just rising from their beds. Don't get too used to the Jade Palace. You'll be back here soon enough, Jai called out tauntingly. I halted by the entrance, not turning around. Thank you for your kind wishes, Jai, I said, in as pleasant a tone as I could muster. When I return, it will be to pack my things. Do take care of Lady Mailing's garments better in the meantime. For your own sake, be sure to keep them away from the inkstone. I strode away, my back pulled straight, yet glad she could not see my face. Despite my bold words, a part of me was certain her mean-spirited prediction would hold true. However, since the day by the river, I was no longer content to feign indifference, nor hold my tongue against insult. Outside the mansion, it struck me that I did not know the way to the Jade Palace. Even if I could bring myself to ask Lady Mailing, she would never aid me. I raised my head to search the skies. The Jade Palace floated on a bank of clouds above the kingdom. It would not be hard to find. Whenever I'd ventured outside before, I'd never had the time to linger. All around were the magnificent estates of the most powerful immortals of the realm. Some were built from rare woods with tiered roofs of glazed tiles, while others were crafted from polished stone with elegantly upturned roofs. Trees and shrubs abounded in jeweled tones of crimson and amethyst, emerald and vermilion. The celestial kingdom was like a garden in eternal spring. The flowers did not wither and the leaves did not brown. Today, the ground gleamed a brilliant blue, mirroring the clear heavens above, as though earth and sky were one. The stairway of pure white marble leading to the palace disappeared among the clouds. As I walked up the steps, gripping the railing, my eyes were drawn to the intricate phoenix carvings on its balusters. Reaching the top, I stilled at the sight. Amber columns held up a magnificent three-tiered roof of grass-green jade. Gold dragons perched majestically in each corner, luminous pearls clutched within their jaws, so lifelike I could almost feel the wind rippling through their manes. The white stone walls were flecked with crystals, which glittered like stars against a sea of clouds. Flanking the entrance were bronze incense burners, studded with precious gems, from which tendrils of sweet smoke curled. An enormous plaque of lapis lazuli hung over the entrance, etched in gold with the characters, Jade Palace of Immortal Heaven. As a waiting attendant gestured at me, I followed him through the red lacquered doors, trying not to gawk at the ceilings painted with flowers in cobalt, scarlet, and persimmon. We crossed winding corridors and large pleasure gardens, golden pavilions and lotus-filled ponds, before emerging in a courtyard teeming with immortals. I craned my neck to read the wooden plaque painted with the name of this place, Courtyard of Eternal Tranquility. Although today, the residence of the Crown Prince was anything but tranquil. While the sun was not yet high, the air thrummed with immortal auras. All the other candidates had already gathered, cultivated and plucked from the most illustrious families in the kingdom. All eager to be planted in the Crown Prince's garden, just as I was, I admitted to myself, although I felt as out of place here as a weed among the orchids, just as whenever I compared myself to my mother. Beyond their lineage, the other candidates were undoubtedly bright, cultured, accomplished, powerful. While we were all attired similarly, jade and gold gleamed from their hair, jeweled ornaments dangling from their waists. Their slippers were thickly embroidered with silk thread, some encrusted with lustrous pearls. Many stared at me curiously, and when my eyes met Lady Mailing's, her lips puckered as though she had bitten into a sour plum. She turned away with a forced laugh, her words drifting to me as she made no attempt to lower her voice. "That girl over there, the one who looks like a mortal peasant, she used to be my attendant." Lady Mailing paused, letting the gasps quieten before she continued.
The worst one I ever had, both stupid and dull." "How did she get selected?" a slender man asked, glancing at me. Her nose wrinkled. "She begged Prince leeway for the chance, and he took pity upon her. He probably only allowed it because he knew she could not win." My fingers dug into the skirt of my robe, crumpling the delicate silk. She meant to wound me, to shake my confidence, perhaps. Little did she know how deep her jibes went. But I would give her no satisfaction, my desire to win hardening instead. I would feel no remorse for my supposed temerity in climbing above my station to reach for the prize. What did I care for such rules anyway? I was not brought up to revere their titles or rank, and I would certainly not start now. Not when winning would transform my life, not just gild an already bright future. A gong was struck, its brassy tone reverberating loudly, silence trailing in its wake. Attendants hurried into the courtyard, clearing the path to the raised dais in front of the pavilion where 13 desks were arranged. An odd number, and I guessed I was the late addition. Whispers rustled through the crowd as the immortals sank to their knees, touching their foreheads to the ground. I followed suit hastily as the crown prince entered, accompanied by his mother and their attendants. "All may rise." The familiar sound of his voice calmed my nerves. As I rose, I glanced eagerly at the dais. Was this the same young man who had cleaned the dirt from my hairpin and listened to my troubles? A collar of gold gleamed at his neck, beneath a blue brocade robe embroidered with yellow dragons. A silvery glow emanated from their jaws, as though they were breathing mist and cloud. Flat links of white jade clasped his robe around his waist. His hair was drawn into an immaculate topknot, encased in a gold crown set with a large oblong sapphire. How grand he looked, majestic even. And yet, he was also just as I remembered, with his thoughtful expression and dark, intelligent eyes. My gaze shifted to the brilliant vermilion robes of his mother beside him. The scarlet phoenixes on her garments stretched their graceful heads, their crests almost entangled in the long necklace of jade beads around her throat. As my gaze drifted up to her face, my blood froze to ice. The Celestial Empress. The one who had threatened and terrified my mother, forcing my flight from home. Anger sparked, thawing my fear, my emotions warring within. My fingers curled into tight fists as I forced my mouth into a bland smile. How senseless of me to have missed the connection. Was my mind dulled from grief and those months of sleepless nights? My instincts yelled at me to leave, but I could not reveal myself now. Besides, the Empress did not have the slightest inkling of my identity. More importantly, necessity outweighed my fear. I needed this opportunity to have any hope of making something of myself, even if it brought me closer to those I dreaded, those I despised. Slowly, I unclenched my hands, letting them hang limp by my sides. At Prince Leeway's nod, the chief attendant called out, "For the first 2 challenges, all candidates will participate. Only the winners will move on to the 3rd and final round. His Highness has determined that no magic is permitted. These are tests of skill, learning, and ability, of which he prizes most." He paused. "The first challenge will be the art of tea brewing." I breathed out, feeling my tension ease. Part of me had feared being set some impossible task that I would fail before it began. But my relief was short-lived as the candidates hurried into the pavilion in a swirl of silk and brocade. I dashed to my assigned desk, trying to calm my thumping heart. I could brew tea. I had done so countless times before, for myself, my mother, even for Lady Mailing. Except, what was all this on the table before me? My head began to throb at the bewildering assortment of items. Over a dozen teapots in varying sizes of clay, porcelain, and jade. A large tray was crammed with jars of tea leaves, black oolong curls, pearls of jasmine, and leaves of golden brown and green.
In a corner was a pile of bricks and cakes of pressed puer. Tiny porcelain bowls heaped with dried flowers were lined up beside them. I picked up a few items and lifted them to my nose, earthy and heady, flowery and sweet. The aromas only confounding me further. I could barely identify a few, longjing tea, jasmine, and wild chrysanthemum among them. My spirit sank as I looked around. The other candidates were sniffing the teas expertly before making their selections. A few picked more than one type, perhaps disdaining a single blend as too humble. Those quickest were already pouring out their teas, while I had not even made my choice. Seizing a fragrant cake of puer, I pried off a wedge with a silver needle and dropped it into a porcelain teapot. I had little experience brewing this, but I heard the finest leaves were pressed into these forms and aged for years, decades even. As I waited for the water to boil, I glanced around again, only now realizing those who chose puer all used clay teapots, some tossing out the first steep. Struck by sudden doubt, I discarded my first choice, deciding to stick with what I knew best, my mother's favorite longjing, the dragon well tea. Steam hissed from the bronze kettle, and quickly, I poured the boiling liquid over another tea set to warm it, to better awaken the flavor in the leaves. Without a pause, I tossed a fistful of the bright green leaves into the teapot and filled it with hot water. Replacing the lid, I waited impatiently for it to steep. 20 seconds. No more, as I was almost out of time. I poured the tea into a porcelain cup, a murky brown soup. My gut twisted as I lifted the lid to inspect the dregs. Careless, I cursed myself. In my haste, I had placed the longjing into the same pot as the puer. When mixing teas, I had been cautioned to take care with the water temperature and the ratios to balance their flavors, whether delicate or strong. From the heavy and dull aroma emanating here, I had gotten it all wrong. Someone cleared his throat, the chief attendant, waving me over impatiently. I was the only one who had not served my tea, and now there was no time to brew another. My hands were stiff as I carried the tray to Prince Leeway. With every step, my grand dream of distinguishing myself here faded further into oblivion. Worse yet, what if His Highness spat out my tea? The Empress would be furious. I might be ejected from the competition at once, deemed as unworthy and unfit as everyone here believed me. As I placed the tray before Prince Leeway, his eyes warmed in recognition, flicking down to the sandalwood name tablet by my waist. Without hesitation, he lifted the cup to his mouth and took a long sip. I was standing in front of him, so only I saw the slight wrinkle across his brow, the quirk of his lips. It was gone in an instant, but my spirits plunged. There was no way I could imagine that to be an expression of pleasure. However, to my astonishment, Prince Leeway lifted my cup into the air.
This one. I've never tasted such a unique blend before.
He nodded to an attendant who recorded my name. The Celestial Empress leaned forward. Leeway, are you sure? It's such an odd color. Let me try it. A shiver rippled down my spine. How well I remembered her voice, melodious yet sharp. As Prince Leeway handed her the cup, it slipped from his fingers, striking the ground with a crash. The porcelain shattered, dark liquid pooling on the stone floor, the remnants of my unfortunate concoction. A crowd of attendants rushed forward to clean up the mess, but the Empress ignored them, glaring at me as though it were I who had dropped it. When the chief attendant announced me as the winner of the first challenge, I slumped with relief, taking no offense at the shocked whispers. For, despite Prince Leeway's words, I doubted my tea deserved the honor. Yet somehow I was ahead in the competition, and that was what mattered. In front of the pavilion, a painting of flowering osmanthus trees was unveiled for the second challenge. As the audience sighed in admiration, we were asked to compose a couplet inspired by the scene. I stifled a groan. It had been a long time since I held a brush, much less composed anything. I tried to conjure up elegant words and flowery phrases, but my mind remained as blank as the untouched paper before me. I closed my eyes, the smell of ink sharper in the dark, heavy, with a faint medicinal undertone. I could almost imagine myself back in my home, the cool air blowing through my window, rustling the thin sheets on my wooden desk. It was years ago when my mother had begun teaching me to write. I remember how her sighs had echoed through my ears. While she had been patient, I was a challenging student, particularly for the subjects that did not interest me. "Xingyin, hold the brush firmer," she had admonished me for the 10th time. "A thumb on one side, your index and middle fingers on the other. Straight, don't let it slant down." Only after she had been satisfied did she allow me to dip the stiff ivory brush hairs into the glossy ink. As I swirled it harder against the inkstone, she had warned, "Not too much. Your lines will be clumsy. The ink will bleed." I had imagined the elegant characters I would form, but my enthusiasm soon waned after making the same wobbling stroke again and again. "What's the point of learning this?" I asked impatiently. "It's not like I'm going to become a scribe or scholar." She had taken the brush from me then, drawing the character Yong in steady, precise movements. Forever, the word composed of the 8 brush strokes from which all characters were formed. "You'll never grow if you only do what you're good at," she had said. "The most difficult things are often the most worthwhile." Reluctant to leave the haven of my memory, I opened my eyes slowly. The other contestants wrote with a frenzied calm, bent over in concentration. I stared at the painting, no longer thinking of what might please the judges, but how much I missed my mother, until it hurt. Lifting my brush, I wrote the following lines. "The blossoms fall, their sweet fragrance is lost. Once warmed by the sun, now sunken in frost." When my couplet was read aloud, there were a few nods and appreciative murmurs. Mine was far from the best, but I was just grateful to not have disgraced myself. After the Empress selected Lady Lian Bao's as the winner, I clapped along with the audience. As the painting was carried away, several attendants entered, bearing large trays piled with food for the afternoon meal. I lost count of the staggering number of dishes as the tables heaved under platters of prawns simmered in golden butter, roasted pork, chicken braised with herbs, delicate soups, and vegetables artfully shaped into flowers. It smelled delicious, yet I could only manage a few bites before my stomach churned in protest. I laid my chopsticks down, looking up to see Lady Lian Bao pushing the food around her plate with as little enthusiasm. There was an incessant flow of chatter around us, but all I could think of was what would come after, the last challenge which only we would participate in. When our eyes met, I shot her a tentative smile, which she returned after a moment's hesitation. After the plates and remaining food had been whisked away, the clang of the gong rang out once more. The chief attendant announced loudly, "For the final challenge, Lady Lian Bao and attendant Xingyin will each select an instrument to perform a song of their choice. The winner will be chosen by Her Celestial Majesty and His Highness." My heart leapt. Finally, something I possessed some skill in. The desks had been cleared, and a vast assortment of instruments laid out. Lady Lian Bao bowed to the dais before selecting the chin and taking her seat. She played a beautiful melody, a classic about the leaves in the mortal world changing their color from jade to russet, her fingers plucking the strings masterfully. While I admired her ability, my confidence dipped with each perfect note. It was my turn. As everyone swung toward me, my palms broke out in a sweat. I wiped them against my skirt, trying to calm myself. I had only ever performed in front of my mother and Pinga. A most amiable audience, a most forgiving one. With wooden steps, I made my way toward the center of the pavilion. My eyes darted over the zithers and lutes, glazing over the chime bells and drums, but there was no flute. I paused before the chin, the only one familiar to me here. However, it was not my best instrument, and Lady Lian Bao had played it far better than I ever could. To select it would be to choose defeat, and a lifetime in the Golden Lotus Mansion would not bring me one step closer to my dream. Grateful that the long skirt hid my shaking legs, I bowed to the dais. Your Celestial Majesty, Your Highness, there is no flute here. May I play my own instrument? The Empress pursed her lips. The rules cannot be broken. Her tone was sharp with disapproval. I kept my face lowered so she would not see my stifled fear and resentment. Your Celestial Majesty, the rules only stated that I had to select an instrument to perform. It did not specify from where. Someone gasped. I glanced up to see the chief attendant take a hasty step away. The Empress glowered as she tossed her head back, the jade beads around her neck clicking furiously. You insolent girl! How dare you argue with me?
Honorable Mother, it's our mistake that no flute was provided, Prince Liwei interjected. I don't see why it matters if she plays her own. Are not our instruments of equal standard to any others? The Empress leaned forward as she addressed me in a chilling tone.
Your flute will be inspected. Should we discover any enchantment upon it, you will be whipped until you cannot walk for attempting to cheat.
There will be no whipping today, Liwei said tightly.
One of his hands was clenched in his lap. She did not reply, gesturing toward someone behind her. Minister Wu, conduct the inspection. An immortal with pale brown eyes stepped out from the crowd, the amber in his hat gleaming like drops of gold. It was him, the minister who had discovered the shift in the moon's energy, who had alerted the Empress and brought her to my home. Perhaps he was merely a vigilant courtier, but my gut clenched at the sight of him. In my shock at seeing the Empress in the tumult of the day, I had not realized he was here too. I could feel the Empress's gaze upon me. Everyone was staring at me as I fumbled with the ties of my pouch. If they believed me nervous, I was glad for it. Better that than the simmering fury which threatened to erupt. How dare she accuse me of cheating? Perhaps, in her mind, someone like me would have no scruples. Perhaps, I thought viciously, she only suspected me of what she was capable of herself. I bowed, raising my arms to offer up my flute. An attendant rushed to take it and passed it to Minister Wu. His expression was one of bored disinterest, a far cry from the eagerness he had shown in my mother's troubles. Did he find today's proceedings tiresome? Did he resent being ordered around by the Empress? Nevertheless, he performed his role admirably, inspecting my flute with meticulous care. How I hated seeing my precious instrument, my mother's gift, between his gloved fingers. Finally, he turned to the Empress.
There is no enchantment.
Her displeasure was evident in her curt nod. Proceed, she ordered. As the Empress's attendant returned my flute, my fingers closed tight around it. I breathed deeply, trying to loosen the tightness in my chest, still burning with the humiliation of her accusation. Closing my eyes, I tried to shut out the indifferent strangers around me, searching for the melody I wanted, of a bird's desperate hunt for her stolen children, until she froze to death when winter came. One of sorrow, grief, and loss, to channel the emotions swirling through me. As a stillness swept over me, I lifted the flute, rejoicing in the familiar press of the cool jade against my lips. How I had missed this. The song began playfully, with joyous notes rippling through the air, soaring clear and pure. Slowly, the melody morphed into jagged uncertainty and terror before plunging into the abyss of despair. The last note faded. With trembling hands, I lowered the flute. Ping-e had praised my playing, but would it be deemed lacking here? I glanced up to find the Empress white-faced and furious. Surely that was a good sign, though I could not read Minister Wu's expression. A clap rang out, joined by others, the sounds crashing together like thunder. A fierce gladness coursed through me that regardless of the outcome, I had tried my best. Prince Liwei and the Empress conferred for a long time. As the last performer of the day, I had remained in my seat before them and caught snatches of their conversation. The Empress tried her utmost to sway her son. Lady Lianbao's heritage is impeccable. She is well educated, intelligent, graceful, and musical. How can you prefer a mere attendant to her? She looks so common, and that mark on her chin is a sure sign of an ill temper. I clasped my hands in my lap, squeezing my fingers together.
Honorable Mother, if we chose someone based only on their heritage, there would be no need to hold this event today.
His tone was respectful, yet firm. Silence hung in the air as they stared at each other. I saw little resemblance in their features, for which I was glad. A warmth to Prince Liwei's face, instead of the cold, stark plains of the Empress. Finally, she sighed, an exasperated sound. Such a trifling matter does not merit my time. I expect you to obey us in more important concerns. Without another word, the Empress rose and left the courtyard, her attendants hurrying after her. When my name was announced, I did not hear the cheers and well wishes. My heart swelled with relief, yet I still feared this was just a dream. Across the crowd, my restless gaze sought Prince Liwei's. Only after I saw his answering smile did I dare to hope, as the first flowers springing forth after a long winter. 5. The sun was low in the sky by the time I packed my belongings at the Golden Lotus Mansion. I could have left the next day, but I had no reason to delay. There were no farewells to make, no one I would miss here. In the days after the competition, Lady Mei-ling and her other attendants had kept me busy with an endless stream of unpleasant and humiliating tasks. I would have liked to say that such maliciousness slid off me as water on oil, that the joy in my heart left no room for bitterness to fester. But I was neither so magnanimous nor forgiving. I had learned by now that nothing irked my tormentors as much as indifference, and so I had smiled at their commands, bowed, and complied, all the while imagining their dismay when I left for the palace to never return. As I walked up the white marble stairs which led to the Jade Palace, my feet were lighter than the clouds that drifted above. To my surprise, I found the chief attendant waiting by the entrance. His lips thinned in disapproval at the sight of me, or perhaps he did not appreciate the lateness of the hour.
Her Celestial Majesty asked that I instruct you in your duties.
Without waiting for my response, he strode through the red lacquered doors, leaving me to hurry after him. Gripped by anxiety before, all I could recall was a blurred haze of vibrant color and exquisite beauty. Calmer today, I studied my surroundings, discovering that the Jade Palace was the size of a small city and laid out with methodical precision. The soldiers were housed in the outermost perimeter along the palace walls, while a little farther in were the rooms of the attendants and palace staff. Ringed by flowering gardens and carp-filled ponds was the outer court, the quarters of honored guests and select courtiers without an estate of their own. The inner court was where the royal family resided, their sprawling courtyards clustered around the heart of the palace, the imperial treasury, the chamber of reflection, and the hall of eastern light. Lost in this maze of winding paths, each hall and chamber with its own name and designated purpose, I recalled the simplicity of my home with a pang. While the grounds of the Pure Light Palace were vast, our needs were undeniably more modest, with no courtiers to entertain, the uncomplicated meals which we prepared ourselves, and a wild forest in our backyard. As we walked, the chief attendant droned on about the rules of etiquette.
You must kneel when you greet His Highness and whenever he issues you a command. At all other times, bow from your waist when he speaks to you. Always address His Highness using his title and never his name. If you have the good fortune to meet their celestial majesties, kneel and press your forehead to the ground until they give you permission to rise. If you walk past someone of higher rank, stop and bow. Speak in a soft tone. Dress neatly as befits your station.
I listened attentively at first, but my attention soon wandered to the ornately carved ceilings and pillars along the corridor. Gilded phoenixes were interspersed with crimson peonies and emerald green leaves. The walkway cut through a garden which I longed to explore, shaded with magnolia and crabapple trees. I stopped, realizing that I had lost sight of the chief attendant. Spinning around, I found him standing a short distance behind, his arms crossed over his chest as he glared at me with intense displeasure. I bowed, low. While I was unfamiliar with the nuances of palace hierarchy, the chief attendant evidently believed himself my superior. "Thank you for your guidance," I intoned as respectfully as I could, all the while wondering how many rules I had missed and if they were of any importance. To my relief, he unfolded his arms and continued walking.
Should a noble have assumed this position, he or she would not reside within the palace, instead arriving each morning to accompany His Highness and returning home each evening. However, given your situation, we needed to make some adjustments.
Here the chief attendant sighed, as though he had made some onerous concession.
With these additional benefits in mind, in addition to your duties as Prince Liwei's learning companion, Her Celestial Majesty has commanded that you serve him as well.
I looked away to hide my confusion, aware of his watchful gaze on me. Was I a glorified attendant or a disgraced companion? This was not the prize I had won, and I did not think another would be treated so, certainly not Lady Lin Bao. Did the Empress hope I would take offense and refuse? I was not as weak-willed as that. Despite the shade she had cast over my achievement, I would not storm out in a fit of pique. After serving Lady Mei Ling, this was no hardship. Moreover, I preferred to earn my keep, instead of feeling indebted to their celestial majesties. Perhaps I should have resented my reduced status more. But for this opportunity, I would sweep the floors here every day if I had to. "I would be honored to serve His Highness," I said. The chief attendant pursed his lips.
You are honored indeed. Do not forget that. You are to awaken each morning before His Highness rises and help him dress. You will prepare his tea and arrange his meals. While at mealtimes you may dine with His Highness, serve him before yourself. Do not eat until he takes the first bite. You will accompany him to his classes and training, where you will study alongside him, placing his learning needs above your own, of course.
"Of course," I repeated tightly, biting back the choicer words that sprang to my tongue. Fortunately, we soon entered the courtyard of eternal tranquility. How serene it was, without the crowd of spectators and anxiety gnawing my insides. Jasmine, wisteria, and peach blossom trees bloomed in the garden, their fragrance delicate and sweet. A waterfall rumbled into a pond which thronged with yellow and orange carp. Overlooking it was the pavilion where the selection had been held, except now a round marble table and several stools were arranged within.
This is your room.
The chief attendant stopped outside the closed doors of a small building.
One more thing. I urge you to maintain an attentive and respectful manner at all times, creating a harmonious environment for His Highness. During his bath,
I inhaled sharply, the breath hissing between my lips. "I need to help His Highness with his bath?" He drew himself up, shooting me a censorious look.
When His Highness is taking his bath, use that time to prepare his books and materials for the following day.
He enunciated each word with painstaking clarity, no doubt taking me for a fool. I mumbled my thanks, grateful when he left. Sliding the doors open, I entered. The room was spacious and well-furnished, with a large wooden bed draped with light blue curtains. Silk scroll paintings hung on the walls, depicting scenes of violet-gray mountains and cypress trees, pheasants and peonies. A large window opened to the courtyard, and beside it was a desk, stacked with paper, a set of writing brushes, and a porcelain inkstone. A silk lantern was already lit, throwing its radiance against the dwindling light. I perched on the bed in disbelief, pinching the flesh of my arm. It stung. This was real. I wanted to laugh aloud as I fell back onto the soft mattress. The serenity of this place, broken only by the rhythmic flow of water and the wind rustling through the trees, reminded me of home. And after living with those who had found my every word and gesture wanting, it was a relief to be alone once more. Undisturbed by the nightmares, I slept through the night until sunlight streamed through my window. The curtains fluttered in the morning breeze, laden with the scent of flowers. There was an unfamiliar lightness in my spirit. The lack of dread, I realized. I had not been aware of the tension coiled within me until it was gone. Piles of silks and brocade were stacked in the cupboard, and I pulled out a white robe which I fastened around my waist with a length of green satin. Its flowing skirt was embroidered with butterflies, and when I ran a knuckle across the smooth stitches of a wing, it fluttered. An enchanted dress. Did this mean my life force was strong? Would I soon learn to use it? My skin tingled at the thought. Leaving my room, I crossed the courtyard to Prince Leeway's chambers, the large building across from mine. The wooden doors were lacquered a rich red, latticed with a pattern of circles interspersed with gilded camellias. Raising my hand, I knocked gently. When there was no response, I rapped harder. After waiting a short while, I slid it open, anxious to not be late. It was dim inside, thick brocade drawn across the windows and around the rosewood bed in the far corner. Prince Leeway must still be asleep. My heart beat quicker as I stepped into the room, a floorboard creaking beneath my feet. "Your Highness? I was instructed to wake you at this hour." My voice came out thin and uncertain, his title stiff against my tongue. Recalling the chief attendant's lecture, I sank to my knees, folding myself over until my forehead thumped clumsily against the hard floor. Silence greeted me in return. I shifted, wondering how one might respectfully awaken a prince. The bed curtains rustled a moment before they were pulled away. Lifting my head, my eyes locked onto his. Heat rushed into my face when I realized he wore just his white underrobe. "Tea," I blurted. "Do you want some tea, Your Highness?" He propped himself up on one elbow, yawning as his hair fell loosely across his shoulders.
"What are you doing on the floor? Rise, there's no need to kneel. You weren't nearly as respectful when we first met."
"Only because I didn't know who you were. You shouldn't sneak up on people without warning or a procession or whatever you usually do. It's most inconsiderate and unfair of—" Too late did I shut my mouth. He had a knack for needling me. He grinned, looking unexpectedly pleased.
"I'm glad the person I met by the river is still here. You seemed different a moment ago. So deferential."
I bared my clenched teeth in more a grimace than a smile. "Tea, Your Highness?"
"Ah, yes, please."
But then a strange expression flitted across his face.
"Could you ask someone from the kitchen to prepare it? I'm not sure I could drink your unique brew a second time."
Caught between laughter and mortification, I hurried to the kitchen, retracing my steps from yesterday. A rich and savory aroma wafted from the simmering pots of porridge, the pan sizzling with crescent-shaped dumplings. Distracted, I almost collided into an attendant carrying a steaming bowl of soup. He shot me a fearsome glare, his mouth opening to scold me, but someone grabbed my arm and pulled me away. It was a girl in the purple robe of a kitchen attendant. Her cheeks had the rounded curves of an apple, and her black hair was coiled into a bun. "Best to stay out of his way. He thinks he's better than the rest of us because he serves the Empress." Her chestnut brown eyes darted to me. "I'm Minyi. Are you new? What do you do? Whom do you serve?" I paused, taken aback by her inquisitiveness. But I detected no malice in her, just curiosity and an openness which reminded me of Pinga. "Prince Leeway," I replied. "Ah, so you're the one who displeased Her Celestial Majesty." My mouth went dry, the smell of food now turning my stomach. How quickly the news had spread. She patted my hand. "Don't worry. Her Celestial Majesty disapproves of almost everyone. Now, was there something you or His Highness needed?" "Just breakfast. And tea for His Highness," I said, recovering myself. Is there anything you wanted? She asked. When my gaze strayed to the dumplings, she winked. I'll make sure you get an especially large serving this morning. Thank you. I bowed to her, but she pulled me up. No need for that. You're Prince Liwei's companion. She rubbed her chin in contemplation. Maybe I should bow to you. Please don't, I said with feeling, before thanking her once more and leaving. In Prince Liwei's room, I helped him to dress, holding out a sky-blue brocade robe as he slipped into it. Around his waist, I knotted a black sash, to which he fastened an ornament of yellow jade and silk. His dark hair flowed loosely down his back as he sat before a mirror, holding out a silver comb. Would you help me? I hesitated before reaching out to take it. I had only ever done my own hair, in the simple style which required no skill whatsoever. In the Golden Lotus Mansion, it was Jia Yi who had the intimate task of dressing Lady Mei Ling. I ran the comb through Prince Liwei's strands with rhythmic strokes, my mind working furiously as I tried to recall the men's styles from the Golden Lotus Mansion. His hair was heavier than mine, silken and lustrous, spilling down his back like polished ebony. Finding a knot, I dug the comb deeper, accidentally ripping out a few strands. He inhaled sharply, turning to me with a pained expression. Xingyan, have I offended you in some way? The comb fell from my hand with a clatter. Perhaps I had attacked his hair with more vigor than intended. I'm sorry, Your Highness. With deft fingers, he pulled his hair into a smooth top knot, which he tucked into a silver headpiece and secured with a carved jade pin. Catching my eye in the mirror, he arched an eyebrow. Are you? Sorry enough to help me with my hair every morning until you get it right? Was that a command? Recalling the rules of etiquette, I knelt in acknowledgement, but he reached out, placing his hands on my elbows to lift me up. Xingyan, we'll be together every day. When it's just the two of us, there's no need for such formality. You don't need to kneel or bow every time I say something, or you'll spend most of the day with your head on the ground. And just call me Liwei. When we met, I felt there were no walls between us, that you were someone I could speak freely with. I'd like us to be friends. If you want that too? He asked gently. My eyes collided into his. How warm his smile, like a ray of sunshine, had slid into the solitude of my soul. He was not at all what I expected of a prince, but so much more. I wondered what the chief attendant would make of this. Not that it mattered. Yes, I would, I replied. After our morning meal, we left to our first lesson. I followed Liwei through the seemingly endless corridors into a large garden. Graceful willows ringed a lake, a red wooden bridge arching over the water to a small island. A single pavilion was built upon it with an upturned roof of glazed green tiles, blending seamlessly into the verdant surroundings. I inhaled deeply the fresh air, tempted to linger, but Liwei strode ahead through a circular gateway of white stone adorned with a lacquered plaque which read, Chamber of Reflection, an apt name for a place of learning, one I hoped to live up to. As we sat down at a long table and took out our books, I looked around the room. The gray marble floor, plain wooden beams, and sparse furnishings were a stark contrast to the rest of the opulent palace. Shelves were crammed with scrolls, and books were piled onto the tables which had been pushed against the walls. The tall latticed windows opened out to the garden, the cool air drifting into the chamber. An elderly immortal entered. Liwei whispered to me that he was the keeper of mortal fates who would teach us the history of the realms. His white beard hung past his waist, and his wrinkled hand grasped a jade staff. I had seen those creases on Ping-A's face before, as she tucked me in bed those nights my mother lingered too long on the balcony. My finger had brushed the lines at the corners of her eyes. Ping-A, what are these? A mark of the years, she had replied. Are you older than Mother? I was surprised, as my mother seemed so grave and solemn. By 100 years at least. Up until adulthood, our lives follow a similar pattern to those of the mortals. After that, our ages cease to matter. An immortal who is 1,000 years old may appear the same as one who is 30. The strength of our life force determines our youth. I raised myself up on an elbow, alight with curiosity. Life force? The core of our powers, which determines how much energy we possess to be channeled into magic. I have these lines because I'm not as strong, she said. Will Mother have these lines? Me? I had asked. Only time will tell. Before I could ask more, Pinga had hurried from the room, closing the door firmly after her. The memory tugged at my heart. Until the Empress's arrival, this was the first and last time Pinga had spoken to me of magic. Now I knew the secrets she had kept that night, those of my sealed powers. This discovery might have upset me more had I learned it before the Empress's visit. But I found it no longer mattered. Not now, after the storm had broken and swept me away. Though I could not help wishing that I had known of its existence, that I might have done something to prevent it. The Keeper of Mortal Fates picked up a book, flicking through its pages. How old is he? I blurted to Leeway as I stared at his snow-white hair. The Keeper glanced up with a pained expression. Do not comment on another's age. It's not considered good manners anywhere, especially in the mortal realm. His manner was stern, yet not unkind, as though warning me of others who might take offense more easily. I murmured a hasty apology, but the moment the Keeper turned away, Leeway leaned closer to whisper, Some immortals choose to no longer preserve their youth. Because we prefer to preserve our wisdom, the Keeper snapped. Your Highness, I urge you to set a better example for your study companion. I nodded somberly, ignoring Leeway's glare, although I admittedly had a part in his rebuke. It was refreshing to hear someone other than me reprimanded for their conduct. When the Keeper of Mortal Fates left, a tutor arrived to teach us about the constellations, then another for herbology. I was struggling to sit still during the lengthy lesson, delivered by an unsmiling immortal with a pointed chin and pedantic air. As my eyes glazed over the pictures of flowers, all of which were beginning to look the same, my hand flew to my mouth to stifle a yawn. Perhaps sensing my wandering attention, the teacher swung around. Xingyin, what are the properties of this plant? His tone was biting as he tapped the page in front of me with a slender bamboo cane. I bolted upright, staring blankly at the picture of an unremarkable pale blue flower with pointed petals. Star Lilies, its title read. Unfortunately, no other information was forthcoming. I glanced wildly at Leeway. He widened his eyes at me before closing them and letting his head droop to one side. Sleep, I cried out, catching his meaning. The teacher's mouth pursed. Correct. Though bitter, this wildflower can be a potent sleeping drug when consumed with wine. Thank you, I whispered to Leeway. You're welcome. A small smile played on his lips. I had just put away the books from the last lesson when a grim-looking immortal strode toward us, his boots clicking against the marble floor. His lean face was unlined save for a deep crease in his brow, and his dark hair was pulled into a topknot. His armor was crafted from flat pieces of shining white metal rimmed with gold, laced tightly together like scales over his shoulders and chest, reaching down to his knees. Red cloth covered his arms, gathered into thick gold cuffs around his wrists. A wide strip of black leather encircled his waist, set with a disc of yellow jade. Strapped to his side was a large silver scabbard, from which protruded an ebony hilt. The aura which rippled from him was as steady and strong as a sturdy oak of many years. A celestial soldier, just as those Pinga and I had fled that night. A chill settled over me, my fingers curling on the table. Why is he here? Is there some trouble? General Junyun is the highest-ranked commander in the Celestial Army. He's here to instruct us in warfare. Your Highness, he greeted Leeway with a bow. As his gaze slid to me, the lines across his brow deepened. General Junyun, this is Xingyin, Leeway gestured to me. I bowed to the general, but he did not respond. Beneath his piercing glare, I fidgeted, unsettled by the memories his presence evoked.
Are you interested in warfare?
I stiffened at his sharp tone, even as I floundered for an answer. I had given little thought to the grand schemes of kingdoms battling for dominance, for glory, power, and pride. My desires were humbler, smaller. All I wanted to learn was how to defend myself and protect those I loved. I don't know yet. This is my first lesson, I replied. As his expression darkened with disapproval, a spark of defiance kindled in me. I am keen to learn, but a student's interest also depends upon a teacher's skill. His eyes bulged. I held my breath. Would he toss me out of the class? I would have deserved it too for my impertinence. To my surprise, General Genyon grinned instead.
Does Her Celestial Majesty approve of your companion?
He asked Liwei with mock incredulity.
My mother does not involve herself in such matters,
was all Liwei said as he flipped his book open. Though the general's expression was one of disbelief, he said no more on the subject. By noontime, my head throbbed from learning, and my hand ached from writing. When we were dismissed for the afternoon meal, I was glad to escape to the kitchen. Carrying the tray laden with food, I headed toward the pavilion outside the Chamber of Reflection. A small sign hung over it, painted in broad black strokes with the characters, Willow Song Pavilion. A beautiful name. I laid out the steamed fish, tender snow pea leaves, and 8 treasures chicken on the marble table.
A fitting one, too,
Liwei replied, placing a finger to his lips. I did not understand his meaning, but followed his lead to remain silent. When a breeze blew, the willows swayed, dipping their branches into the clear water. As their delicate leaves rustled against each other, the air filled with sighing whispers, an exquisite though melancholy melody. How it reminded me of the wind blowing through the osmanthus trees, the clink of my mother's jade ornaments.
Did you enjoy our lessons?
Liwei asked, breaking my reverie. He served a little of each dish onto my plate, in blatant disregard of convention. Some more than others, I replied, recalling the tedious lecture on plants and herbs. Especially General Genyon's.
I thought you would fall asleep in that class.
Why? Should girls only draw, sing, and sew? I asked, thinking of Lady Mei Ling's lessons and my own with Pinga.
Of course not.
His tone was grave as he leaned forward, like he was about to impart some great wisdom.
What about having children?
There was a teasing glint in his eyes. I choked on a piece of chicken I was chewing, with the added indignity of having Liwei slap my back to dislodge it. Eager to change the subject, I said, Well, I can't draw, and you wouldn't want me to sing.
Will you sew my clothes?
Not unless you want clothes with holes where they shouldn't be. His fingers tapped the table contemplatively.
So, you can't draw, sing, or sew. What about—
No! I burst out, louder than intended, fighting down the flash of warmth across my skin. He blinked, shooting me a look of innocence.
All I was going to ask was whether you would play your flute for me.
Flute? I cursed inwardly, my wandering mind.
What did you think I meant?
He shook his head in mock disapproval. Just that. Nothing else. I grasped at the lie.
How else might you compensate for your shortcomings? It appears you have many indeed.
As Liwei's lips twitched, I suspected he was enjoying this far too much. The same way you can compensate for yours, I retorted.
Mine?
He sounded stung. A part of me wondered if anyone had ever spoken to him this way.
Name one.
Your manners, I offered. Your sense of superiority? Your habit of interrupting your teachers? How you say such outrageous things to amuse yourself? Liwei held up a hand, looking pained.
One was enough.
I tried to keep a straight countenance through the mirth which bubbled up in me. How at ease I felt, my heart lighter than it had been in months. Besides, I don't believe playing music was included in my list of duties, I added. He picked up a glistening piece of white fish, inspecting it for bones before placing it on my plate.
You're not very accommodating. I shot him my sweetest smile. It depends on how you ask. He laughed, but then cleared his throat. I'm sorry for my mother's order, that you were asked to attend to me as well. You don't have to. I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself when I want to. I really don't mind, I said. I'm glad to earn my keep. And if I don't, someone might report back to Her Celestial Majesty. She would be keen for the slightest excuse to dismiss me. Of that, I was certain. Part of me was relieved that the Empress showed me no generosity, because it meant I owed her nothing. And Li Wei did not make me feel like I was attending to him, but rather assisting him. A small distinction, yet it made a world of difference to my pride. Thank you, he said, rising to his feet. Now we must hurry. We have a long afternoon of training before us. My curiosity was pricked. What training? Sword fighting, archery, martial arts. If you aren't interested, I can have you excused, he offered with a magnanimous sweep of his hand. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to stem the exhilaration rushing through me like water streaming down a mountain after a burst of rain. My appetite was whetted after General Zhang Yun's lesson, and I was eager to learn more about the skills which could help me become stronger. Powerful enough to withstand the winds of change or to shift its course, instead of yielding under the slightest breeze. My imagination soared, unfettered, as I fantasized about flying home and breaking the enchantment that bound my mother to the moon. My voice shook with excitement. Li Wei, I'll play the flute for you whenever you wish, as long as you don't excuse me from those lessons.